Renaissance people, if you are enjoying the Italian Renaissance podcast, I have good news. We're now active on Patreon. You can show your love for the show by becoming a patron and get access to additional resources, information, and artworks. Better yet, those who join the Renaissance Master or Renaissance Patron tier will get access to at least one additional podcast episode each month. My goal is to ensure that the main podcast remains a free, accessible source for everyone. Become a patron today through the link in the show notes to support the continued production of new episodes and help build and maintain this community. The Italian Renaissance shop is now also active on Etsy, linked in the show notes. Sport our logo or choose from a growing selection of Italian art-inspired designs. Discounts are offered to select Patreon tiers as well. Your support has my immortal gratitude. Now, enjoy the show. Welcome to the Italian Renaissance podcast, where we discuss essential topics about the art and culture of 15th and 16th century Italy. I'm your host, Lawrence Gianangeli. Andiamo avanti. Hello, Renaissance people. In light of the last few episodes, in light of everything we have been talking about, really, I wanted to hone in on a specific work of art that really ties together a lot of the major concepts that the last few episodes of the show have brought up. What that means is we're going to come back to Sandro Botticelli, and we're going to specifically look at his Primavera. I picked this particular work because it so expertly combines themes from the cult of the saints with ancient mythology, namely the Roman poet Ovid, but also maybe some from his contemporary Poliziano, who you all know by now. It calls to mind the recurring concept of not only how artists reconciled pagan imagery with Christian ones, but also ideas around courtesanship, springing off of how we discussed Simonetta Vespucci in the Florentine courts. Even better, it is a work that is so full of figures that it is really going to put our iconography to the test. We have to sort through them and figure out exactly what's going on here. For that, we'll need to work through the allegory that the work is presenting. Allegory is a prominent feature of Renaissance art. What allegory means is in the sense is that the work itself is representative of something, given that each figure may have multiple readings, and deciphering the allegory becomes extremely complex and maintains a topic of modern art history for paintings from the Renaissance still. But before we do that, I want to be clear about a couple of things. Iconography is not always easy, nor is it absolute. More often than not, we don't have a written record of exactly what these figures are supposed to represent, and in fact, what may seem as an obvious reading of a painting can be interpreted as something entirely different by somebody else. What that means is, in circumstances like these, figures can take on more than one iconographical reading. That means the painting has more than one reading as a whole, regardless of what Botticelli intended, because he's not here to tell us otherwise. Iconography is not always a set and definite mode of interpretation, is what I mean. Sometimes it can be, with the examples I showed in the last episode. But let's call this, let's say, Botticelli's doozy, shall we? And that does not include works where we discussed in, say, the fundamentals of Renaissance painting, where the contract specifically states what the artist should be doing. Because once we get into the end of the Quattrocento, we're starting to see a shift away from arte in the guild craftsman sense and more in the expressive sense. So Botticelli, he left us with this, hoping it to be an object of longevity, at least before his turn to a more iconoclastic Christianity that had him destroy some of his own mythological works under Savonarola, which is a different history, because in this time he is still under Medici patronage, still flirting with paganism, and still putting out his best works. The work is called Primavera, and is in the Uffizi Gallery today. In Italian, it means spring, springtime, like the season. And that's not to be confused with pasta primavera, right? Yummy Italian-American dish that uses fresh vegetables, but can be translated as spring pasta, I guess. You following me here? But he painted this work around the same time as the Venus and Mars and slightly before his birth of Venus, which can be seen as a companion work to this, even if the chronology of events between the two is a little odd. We do not know for sure who commissioned the work. It seems very clear to me that it's a Medici commission, not only for the obvious Medici symbolism, which I will demonstrate to you all how to read those, but also in that it's recorded as having been in the possession of Lorenzo di Pier Francesco de' Medici, that's not Lorenzo the Magnificent, and later in the Villa Castello of the Grand Duke Cosimo. The most widely accepted theory is that this was commissioned for Lorenzo di Pier Francesco's wedding. I also want to note that this is a very large painting. It's 6 feet 8 inches by 10 feet and 4 inches. Not only does that provide the awe factor in terms of size and scale, but it renders each individual detail in the painting very visible, readable, and striking. It shows Botticelli's skill and mastery of space and composition. As always, try to get this image in front of you or look at it and burn it into your brain as you listen. I will, of course, be posting relevant images to the Instagram and Facebook pages, so check those out, please. And after every episode, I also post supplementary images with additional information relevant to our topic. So, what is this painting showing besides what the title obviously tells us? We're seeing 9 figures in the shadows of some forest grove. All of the figures are illuminated, and you have this blue sky streaming in from in between the foliage and the trunks. The figures seem to engage in their own separate affairs, though they do come together for a sense of narrative. This space is the Garden of Venus, a mythical place which boasts eternal spring. So let's read these figures, starting from the left and working our way to the right. On the leftmost part of the painting, a male figure stands in contrapposto, right? A hand's on his hip, his muscles revealed under a loose garment. This is associated as Mercury. We can tell from a few indications. He wears the token winged sandals and holds the caduceus. It's the rod he's holding up. It's the typical identifier with both Mercury and Hermes. It's a winged staff with serpents entwined on it. It's a bit difficult to make out the details of it here, but Mercury is using it to push back a storm cloud that threatens to enter the garden. Does he look familiar to you guys? He looks like Mars, right, in the Venus and Mars, doesn't he? Who also looks like an admittedly much more handsome version of Giuliano de' Medici, who was assassinated a few years prior, one of Botticelli's patrons and good friends. The jury's still out on that, if this is him or not, but it does look oddly similar. In the very least, Botticelli had to use either the same model or calls upon a certain ideal in his mind that reflects his patrons, because the similarities between Mars and Mercury are too hard to ignore. Standing next to Mercury are undoubtedly the 3 Graces. This is an easy interpretation. Standing in the classical pose, hands together, doing a circular dance. These are the Greek symbols of charm, of beauty, of creativity, and even fertility. Appropriate for the Garden of Venus, to be sure, although we have looked at this concept ad nauseum. It is argued that the image of Simonetta Vespucci may be the likeness of any or all 3 of these Graces. It's worthwhile to look at given the resemblance to Giuliano too. Again, right? I also may be inclined to support that the middle Grace is actually looking at him instead of at the other Grace. They all also share the same plane on the painting, right? So this is just more speculation about the Simonetta and Giuliano relationship, but it's Still compelling, I think. When we move into the central figure, compositionally the most important, is associated with Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. But let's complicate things a little bit. Her iconography doubles as the Virgin Mary. We'll be back to that, okay? Above her, her son Cupid, or Eros, right? Erotic love. He pulls back his bow, blindfolded, ready to shoot. Love is blind. Have you ever heard that expression before? And to the right of Venus, the figure that is actually the frontmost on the picture plane, stepping into it actually, is Flora. You wouldn't believe it, but Flora is also often argued to bear resemblance to Simonetta. Okay, but we've exhausted that avenue as to why. But let's look at the bizarre mythology around this figure. We have to look at all three of the rightmost figures. We have Zephyrus, a wind deity, who effectively swoops in and captures the nymph Chloris. He rapes her, thus somehow turning her into Flora. Guys, I know that sounds very weird and violent and doesn't make a lot of sense, but Botticelli is taking this directly from a work by Ovid called the Fasti, and I have a lovely condensed translation of this tale for you here. This is how the myth reads from Ovid. I, who am now called Flora, was formerly Chloris. Modesty shrinks from describing my figure, but it procured the hand of a god for my mother's daughter. 'Twas spring, and I was roaming. Zephyr caught sight of me. I retired. He pursued, and I fled. But he was the stronger, and Boreas had given his brother full right of rape. However, he made amends for his violence by giving me the name of bride. That's a bit of a doozy, yes. Rape is very awful and gross, but it's not uncommon in ancient myth as some kind of narrative device. We have to understand that to decode the Primavera. The rightmost three figures tell this story. Zephyr, the blue-looking wind figure, swoops in on Chloris, who is like, get away from me. But Zephyr is, by way of some ancient insane law, right, is it the right of rape, he's entitled to her somehow. So he rapes her and marries her, right? Quote, giving me the name of bride, okay? This very strange union basically promotes her from nymph, Chloris, to goddess. Chloris becomes Flora, the goddess of flowers and springtime, okay? Keep in mind where we are. Florence, Firenze, Florentia, to the Romans who founded the city, whose mythology we are referencing here. This city bears the name of the goddess Flora. This painting is being marked here as Florentine, the city of flowers, deep in the Arno River Valley, and likening it to the eternal spring of Venus's garden. Does all that make sense? So how do we make sense of all the figures? As I mentioned before, the work was in the possession of Lorenzo di Pier Francesco, likely placed outside of his nuptial chamber. Nuptial, it's a word I only read and rarely say. That is a room which functions for aspects of one's marriage. Aha, marriage. We are getting somewhere now, folks. Let's suppose this painting was commissioned for a wedding. What does springtime have to do with marriage? Fertility, of course. This painting is rich with fertility symbols. We already said that Graces, but Venus, love, Cupid, it's all some sort of fertile eroticism. And while the rape of Chloris is very ugly to our modern eyes, we have to look at the symbolism here. It is an act of consummation, which ultimately transforms Chloris into a being of life and fertility, Flora, in the Republic of Florence, thus likening the bride of Lorenzo, whose name is Semiramide da Piano, to Flora. We can read of its transformation of Flora to what the culture of the time, Quattrocento Florence, valued for its women. And I'm not saying this because I value that for any women, but you have to use the period I when we look at these works, okay? These gorgeous megaliths of art are not always going to be comfortable for the 21st century audience once you look closely. Just as Chloris is rewarded with her metamorphosis. Rewarded, we have to use that lightly, for lack of a better term, given Ovid's most influential work, also called Metamorphosis, so should Semiramide experience a sort of ascension from herself as a non-married woman to her new role as a fertile vessel for her new husband's heirs. I'll be honest, this isn't the most romantic interpretation of this, but it fits well with marriage norms among nobles of the period. With all of this in mind, Semiramide is not likened only to Flora. We said the Venus in the center is also the Virgin Mary. More often than not, Mary can be identified by her gown, typically a combination of red and blue, representing the blood of her son, Jesus Christ, and the blue of the heavens. I'm sure there's probably other things too, right? That is the same way we may identify John the Baptist by his animal skin, or San Lorenzo by his grill. Something very interesting is happening here. She raises her right hand in blessing, a common gesture found in altarpieces and other religious works. What is going on with her left hand? Is she drawing that cloak up, or is she taking it off? And what would each reading mean? If she is taking it off, it goes against the narrative we are establishing here, possibly. Is Botticelli physically showing us the triumph of humanism in his day? Is the Virgin removing her shroud to reveal Venus, a pagan deity? One who also happens to be wearing the headdress of a Florentine noblewoman? Or perhaps we should read that differently. If this Mary Venus is also meant to be Semiramide da Piano, perhaps through marriage she can shed the garment of virginity to be the goddess of love for her husband, as her duty would have been in the period. She can also be putting the cloak on, drawing it up, where her union with Lorenzo and the topics expressed in this painting and where the painting was placed, right, by the nuptial chamber, could indicate that she is meant to be donning the garb of Mary in preparation of motherhood, especially given the very blatant fertility signs we see. That could likewise be how Botticelli is permitted to take on such a major pagan enterprise for a political family that needed to be perceived as pious. Piety is important to the public eye. In putting on the robes of the Virgin Mary, she consequently triumphs over pagan idolatry, giving sanctity to the marriage. All this is to say that this work is an extremely complex allegory with several readings, not just the ones I've presented to you here so far. And there is more. I'm sure whether you have seen this painting or not, or any of Botticelli's women, there's one particular detail that sticks out. We have to ask, why do they all look pregnant? Flora, Chloris, Venus, the Graces. You see what I'm talking about? Particularly in this work, it helps solidify the concepts we've been breaking down. Marriage, fertility, consummation. While these readings might seem a little speculative, there's a very good reason to claim this work as a Medici commission. I use such caution to speech, but frankly, this work is so riddled with Medici symbolism that I would deem it, let's say, maybe silly to not support that claim. I'm open to hear what else it may be, of course. So, in any case, I'm now going to teach you how to recognize an early Medici commission. The Medici coat of arms is an object seen all over Florence and Rome and is easily identifiable. It's a shield bearing typically 6, sometimes 7, gold or orange or red balls. In Italian, these are called palle, which translates literally to balls, be it an orb or soccer ball or a testicle, honestly. I kid you not. In fact, this word was used by the Florentine public to cheer for or praise the Medici when they were in favor, right? Palle, palle. In fact, I was in Florence, and I was walking through the Piazza del Duomo, the main square with the cathedral in it that also has the baptistry, and these are gigantic buildings. So I'm walking on the back end of the baptistry, and I hear the chants, Palle, 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 and I think, oh wow, there must be some sort of historical procession going on with someone dressed, which happens in Florence all the time. People in costume parading down the streets with banners and, period garb. It's really interesting. But so I got really excited to kind of quickly walk around the baptistry and see what was going on. Well, there's a very fun subculture in Italy for recent graduates are oftentimes publicly hazed when they finish their degrees. And sure enough, I saw this poor woman on the, I guess that would be the south end of the baptistry, this very holy and religious space, how do I even explain this? Squatting with a long pair of artificial testicles that she was holding at her midsection, and on the ground was a ball, and she had to use her hips and swing and hit the ball with her fake testicles until it approached the wall of the baptistry. So, sure enough, the spectacle I was hoping to see did not pay off at all. Testicles aside, what the palle are exactly is not super clear on the Medici coat of arms, right? The name Medici simply means doctors, and it could be that the coat of arms mimics a tray of medicinal pills on it. Another story says that it's a shield filled with dents from some heroic battle of a long-dead Medici. I don't remember all those details. Another reads them as oranges, even in that period, associated with their wellness properties that we now know as vitamin C, right? And the Medici Palace in Florence had orange trees in its garden, and the family took this reading and incorporated it into their symbols of patronage. Benozzo Gozzoli's Medici Chapel has oranges in full bloom, as another example, and the trees in the Birth of Venus are orange trees as well. They just don't have any oranges on them, as spring had not yet come. That happens in this painting. So clearly, in the Primavera, we see a full bloom of ripe oranges. The oranges are likened to the Medici Palle, of course. Another Medici symbol here is the laurel. Be it a crown or a laurel wreath or even the laurel tree. We saw that in Pallas and the Centaur, another Botticelli piece, Pallas being adorned with Medici diamonds and a laurel, which is all over her, right? Now, as I tell you this, you need to keep in mind how intentional Botticelli is in the layout and composition of his paintings. Look at Venus. Look at the negative space of the sky and how it literally is crowning her head, much like a laurel crown, no? Do you see it? Do you buy it? I do. So the Medici laurel is in the dead center of the composition here. But get this, just as our figures can have many meanings, this is both a laurel and a halo, further piling on the iconography that Venus is also the Virgin Mary. And if you do not believe me yet, we're going to deepen our understanding of the Mercury figure. We're going to give him some additional meaning and link his image to this concept of Medici patronage. When I was studying art history in undergrad, the textbook I used was a The History of the Italian Renaissance by Frederick Hart. And he offers a very interesting reading of the Mercury figure that kind of helps us compound what all of this is. I'm going to read from that book for you right now. He says, "Also Mercury's rose-colored chlamys is strewn with golden flames, an attribute of the god, but one that also belongs to Saint Lorenzo. They decorate the saint's vestments in Fra Angelico's San Marco altarpiece, made for Cosimo de' Medici, and in many other representations. And the meteor showers that descend on the earth in August each year are known in Italy as the fires of St. Lawrence, because they occur at the time of his feast. Venus' gown is also bordered at the neck with golden flames, while loops of flames encircle her breast. Finally, Mercury also bore responsibility for doctors, whose symbol, the caduceus, he bears. Medici means doctors, and the Medici patron saints were doctors Cosmas and Damian. Mercury here is a stand-in for St. Lawrence, one of the most important saints for the Medici family, minus their own family patron saints, Cosmas and Damian. You see why I gave you guys that episode on the cult of saints, because you need that to interpret paintings that do not at first glance seem to indicate anything about it. And one more stretch of my own here is his hat. Now, Mercury and Hermes are often associated with the type of hat they wear. Botticelli's interpretation of it is a little different, and quite frankly, to me, it looks like the monastic tonsure, right? You guys have seen monks that kind of shave that spot on the back of their head. St. Lawrence is more often than not depicted as tonsured, like a monk. So it seems to kind of put that type of imagery on him. I don't know. What do you think? So we know this work was in the Medici townhouse, the pallae or oranges, the laurel halo, the likening Mercury to St. Lawrence, who, if you listened to the last episode, you know the Medici palace was across the street from the Basilica of San Lorenzo. The Basilica, yeah. In the San Lorenzo neighborhood. Isn't this fun? I'm having fun. This is why I do this. What a rush. I hope that this painting is a lot clearer to you all. By clearer, I mean that I hope you understand that it is not clear at all. And as a work that expresses a very complicated layering that all compound together in a very delicate and intricate reading that all kind of mix to render it a work that is not misunderstood, but wholly complex in a manner that produces multiple correct interpretations. Frederick Hart also indicates that the Venus figure is actually the allegorical figure of marriage, which does not necessarily include the Virgin Mary. And everything we have discussed are just some of the many readings of this work. There are some certainties here, though. Fertility and love are 100% no doubt major occurrences here. We can't interpret those away. I would like to think that we have given this painting some fair treatment now. Coming back to how this episode began, we can now very clearly see the culmination of our topics. The Virgin Mary is identifiable here, though she doesn't belong in the narrative. Her cult iconography is very evident. Classical myth and contemporary religion are very distinctly reconciled, even if the figures are not always read as so. This painting may also contain more traces of the Simonetta Giuliano conspiracy, both long dead, both dear to the artist. The painting also sheds light on the very complicated socio-historical concepts around marriage, crude as they may be, so that we can look at this work as someone from the period would. It gives clear allusion to classical references, Ovid, simultaneously localizing itself in Florence under what is clear to me to be a Medici patronage. Do we now agree this is Botticelli's doozy? Thanks for tuning in and for your consistent support. This show is fun. It's important, I think. It's also a lot of hard work, which makes your engagement and your viewership all the more appreciated. Follow our social media accounts. Support the show directly if you feel so inclined. Any contributions are a great asset in keeping these Renaissance wheels turning. Share our content. Tell your friends. Reach out. I love hearing from you all. Until next time, arrivederci.